probably agree on.
Yeah, the playoff team for sure.
So do you.
I mean, I tell you what, I don't think there was a more accurate state. And
if they struggle again, I mean, I don't think there's any way you can keep Alex Critch, but.
What's going on, y'all? I'm Bud Elliott, and this is yet another edition of my Cover 3 podcast, College Football Summer School. Today, I want to talk Kansas State. And guys, there's really only one place to go for Kansas State coverage. That's Go Power Cat. That's my man, Tim Fitzgerald. What's going on, dude?
Nothing. Just, waiting for some more realignment news to get me through a summer. It's like kind of like an addiction. You got to get it more and more.
I would like some realignment news because, as an attorney, when we have all this lawsuit stuff, I'm like, all right, got to call Bud. I'm like, we were recording some summer schools down in HQ down in Lauderdale on last week, and then they're like, "Hey, can you pop in and do HQ on the lawsuits?" Like, all right, here we go.
Good, I'm in.
Hey, that's job security though, right?
Oh, it is.
Oh man, so Kansas State, pretty nice year last year, obviously, and seemed to be doing really well as a program. I actually saw y'all's bowl game in person. I took my 4-year-old son against NC State. He liked the football. He loved the Pop-Tarts. It
was incredible marketing. A brilliant marketing scheme by that company.
I think now we don't really buy a lot of Pop-Tarts at the house. He probably had 4 or 5 Pop-Tarts in about a 2.5-hour span and acted like it on the ride home. And bedtime was a bit of a challenge until he crashed. So,
yep, it's true for all of us.
But one thing I am interested in seeing here is Kansas State has a lot of new pieces on offense this year.
Yeah.
Right? Like Will Howard is now at Ohio State. Avery Johnson, who my cousins who went to high school with him, have been hyping this kid up since he was like 11 years old. So I've been very much like a fan of Avery Johnson. What will be the biggest differences with how this offense looks with the new coordinator and new quarterback?
Yeah, that's a great question. We don't know quite how Connor Riley will, execute his offense. He's got Matt Wells helping him do that. So they brought in, when Colin Klein went to A&M, they brought in a veteran coach that's been a head coach and been a quarterback himself. And I think that's been good for Avery. What Avery brings to the table is he probably is the fastest guy on the team and a very good and elusive runner, but he's not necessarily a run-first quarterback either. He's quite equipped to throw the ball down the field. They were real careful with him in the Pop-Tarts Bowl, not to get him hurt, first of all, because he was the only really quarterback with any substance of experience. And also, you don't want him in his first start getting his cage rattled and maybe lose some confidence. So they were cautious with him, didn't run him much, and kind of leaned on DJ Giddens in the run game a little bit more than I think they will this season. But he's got some weapons around him. It could be a fun offense.
Do you think he would have beaten out Howard had Howard stayed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone knew it, including Will Howard. And that's a compliment on having a pretty damn good quarterback room.
Yeah,
and in fact, another sign of that is every other quarterback transferred except for a walk-on. I mean, they knew they weren't going to play. They barring injury, they wanted another opportunity somewhere else.
I mean, there's a couple situations like that nationally. At Oregon State, I'm pretty sure Childs would have beaten out DJU. I think Arnold would have beaten out Dylan Gabriel there at Oklahoma. And Kansas State, I wanted to ask you about that. He is reunited with a former Pee Wee ball teammate in Dylan Edwards. How would you expect the backfield to look this year, Tim?
That was an amazing addition for Kansas State. He had committed a year ago to K-State and then switched to Notre Dame and then ended up at Colorado because of a long-term relationship with Deion Sanders with the family. And that just didn't quite pan out. I don't think Dylan ever felt at home in Boulder as a Kansas kid. That's just how it works sometimes. He saw some playing time, but hopped in the portal after spring football and he was coming to K-State almost assuredly. Because he wanted his feet on the ground back in Kansas, but he also knew this: DJ Giddens is the starting running back at Kansas State. So it does offer an opportunity for Connor Riley and Matt Wells to go to the chalkboard, if they still use one, and come up with some interesting schemes to get Dylan Edwards involved, maybe in the slot, maybe in a 2-back set, which K-State doesn't do a lot of. But when you got those 3 weapons together with Avery Johnson, you got to come up with some things. What's really interesting to me about that, this is as good a backfield as maybe you'll see in the conference, and I'll put it up against a lot in the nation, and they're all 3 Kansas kids. So the state of Kansas is delivering some talent, just not enough to sustain, year in and year out high-level recruits.
Absolutely. No, I'm really excited to see how they work with this thing. And I mean, they have thrown the ball to the backs as well. I'm
Yep.
glad you mentioned that, considering they did lose a tight end to the NFL draft and not a ton of returning experience at the receiver position. So, I mean, I would expect a lot of passes to the running backs for Kansas State. So, fantasy football players, keep that in mind there, maybe. But who will be the primary targets out wide or at tight end for the Wildcats?
Well, a big guy named Garrett Oakley came on this season. He started the year last season injured, and he really surged forward as the season went. I'm not going to say he's going to replace Ben Sinnott because that cat was really good, and he could do a lot of things. I mean, he'd line up as a fullback and block the hell out of you. So he was a multi-purpose tool in that offense. It's hard to replace, but they have a pretty good tight end room. lot develops behind Sinnott through the years, so that's a positive. And last year, they decided not to redshirt around midseason Jace Brown, another true freshman who's also Avery's roommate. And they really have a connection. In fact, the game-winning touchdown was last year in the Pop-Tarts Bowl was between those two true freshmen. And, they get Keegan Johnson back, the former Iowa player who's was kind of banged up all season. They've got Dante Cephas coming in, Penn State, and, he kind of didn't really fit in there. They like him. They have some interesting parts at receiver. Receiver's been a problem for K-State for a number of years, and this might be their best group they've had under Chris Kleiman.
Defensively, they do bring back a pretty good bit of production. I mean, some of the guys they lost were kind of more premier players, but is there a spot on this defense that you're like, oh, this position group is definitely better than it was last year?
Defensive end. And they lost one of their key guys to the transfer portal because he wanted to be in a 4-man front, and K-State runs a 3-3-5. And they were a little bit light at defensive end last year to be a 3-man front, and that kind of cost them. There's some pretty good running backs in this conference that they had problems, starting with Ollie Gordon. So they needed to get bigger at the defensive end, but they didn't have to look far because they have 3 guys that were redshirting last year because there was some veteran experience at D end that are all bigger, stronger, faster than what the DNs have been at Kansas State. So I think they're going to be really young at defensive end with some added in, Brennan Mott as an experienced guy. But they are excited about that group of DNs. And I think there'll be some new names popping up on SportsCenter because these guys can get after it.
It's interesting that it's, it'll benefit both the run or both the pass and obviously the run game on defense. Let's fast forward about a month from now. Well, as we record this, I don't know exactly when we will release it. Who's a guy who probably won't get voted first or second team Big 12, but when you're sitting around with all the other Kansas State media scrum, you're like, man, that's a miss on these guys' part. Like I'm telling you, but by the end of the season, this guy's got a chance to be an all-conference player.
Outside linebacker Desmond Pernell, another Kansas kid who was virtually not recruited by anyone. He came to K-State. He was forced into duty a couple years ago due to injuries. And I think he even caught the coaches by surprise how good he was. He covers a lot of space. He's aggressive. He's filled out a lot. It was kind of shocking to see him last year in August when camp was opening. It was notable, and I imagine he's put on some more muscle mass. So the kid can flat play, and he kind of sneaks under the radar. He was under Daniel Green's shadow when Deuce was healthy, and he's got Austin Moore at the other outside linebacker spot. Another Kansas kid that is former walk-on that really has kind of roared to life and been really good. But Pernell can straight up play.
I tell you what, though, I'm a little. I Googled him as you were talking. We did have him higher than the composite did at 24/7 Sports. So we had him number 7 player in the state of Kansas. So at least got some stars on him. I hate when I pull up a guy and I see we didn't have any stars on him or no ranking at all. So he's probably the coverage most active backer. What's he weighing in at now, you think?
I think last year he was at like 225. Anymore, that's a linebacker. It's so weird how things have evolved. But he really does fit what they want to do with that spot. It's, kind of the same spot that he needs to get out and cover once in a while. If, they split everyone out wide, he's in coverage and he can run with guys. So watching his evolution has been something else. To go from a guy that didn't think was real tangible, honestly kind of felt like a filler in that recruiting class, to a guy that now it can play at an all Big 12 level and a great kid on top of that. So it's pretty much a K-State story. a lot of development. This is a developmental program, and he's done a lot of that in his time at K-State and turned himself into a whale of a football player.
Talking to Tim Fitzgerald, Go Power Cat. Tim, what is the most pivotal or important fall position battle you're going to be monitoring?
Position battle? Probably just sorting out that offensive line. I mean, you lose Cooper Beebe. You've got some guys you can slide into that left guard spot, but they're not Cooper Beebe. That guy was the pancake maker. And he could do all the things you need to do in this K-State offense with linemen being able to run and pull and kind of switch assignments. He was just a master at it. They do return 3 guys with starting experience, but how that sorts out, I'm not sure. I mean, they've just got a lot of pieces, and now they got to figure out how those pieces go together, including at left guard. And we'll see who emerges as the starting 5 along there.
Tim, they do have to play 5 conference road games, which in Big 12 is always important to monitor. But the sweet with the sour there is that by almost any measure that they do. I think they're one of the only teams that gets to play the 4 worst teams in the conference in BYU, Houston, Cincinnati, and Arizona State. To the extent that we can predict Big 12 standings, which is not great, by the way.
No, you can't.
Good luck with it. But I have a little more confidence in like the top 2 and then like the bottom 3 or 4, and the middle is just mess. I'm just going to go take a walk.
Mess.
Yeah. What needs to happen to make sure that this team does get back to the Big 12 title game?
Well, I'm going to pick a non-conference game because it's a conference opponent. The leftover game with Arizona, they've got a home-and-home series that starts this year and next year that left on the schedule as a non-conference game because it was too late to replace. That's going to be a Friday night, the new Fox time slot on Friday night. They're going to kick that off week 3. Chris Kleiman's never gone through his non-conference undefeated. It's quite an interesting stat. Tulane's gotten him in the past, and they go to Tulane in the non-conference. And that's an oddity in itself for K-State to go to a non-power site to play a road game. So just getting through that and then getting into conference play is so crucial. But you look at that Kansas game with the Jayhawks. If Jalen Daniels is healthy, they're going to be contending right up there at the top. That's in Manhattan. But you close the year with Farmageddon against Iowa State in Ames, Iowa. And last year we had a blizzard for Farmageddon in Manhattan. I don't know, that might have an ice age this season in Ames. So that series has picked up a lot of tension, a lot of rivalry. It's really grown into something. So that'll be a fun way to conclude the regular season because Iowa State might contend for the Big 12 championship game too.
Indeed, we talked to Cyclone Alert there, and they feel really good. One of the highest returning production numbers in the country. Luckily for the Wildcats, they do get a bye week, and then Arizona State and Cincinnati. Not that those are gimmies, but they're certainly easier than some teams you could play in this conference. And also dodging Utah, which I know Big 12 teams have not played Utah yet, but when SEC teams go out there, or they don't always have a great experience. So Kansas State certainly set up to have another fine year. Tim, really appreciate the time, man. This was fun.
No problem. Just keep an eye on Avery Johnson. People in Manhattan are fascinated by how good this kid's going to be.